for the delay. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Phil Brink. I'm the consulting coordinator of Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Water NetWORK, and I am joined by Greg Peterson. Greg is the executive director of the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, and also behind the scenes, Sarah Didrikson of Colorado Cattlemen's. Sarah is our tech person that helps things go smoothly. So today we are going to be talking about the CAWA Ag Drought Resilience Grant Program. And Greg is leading this program. Myself and staff from the Wilson Water Group are also providing technical support on individual projects related to this program. And also we have an advisory group. So that's comprised of folks from conservation groups, state government entities, water conservation districts, and agricultural organizations. So Greg's going to be walking us through the Ag Drought Resilience Program and just talking about kind of the big picture items, and then we'll drill down into specifics and talk about some projects. We'll get to your questions. If you've got some, or if you just want to know more about it, this is a great time to find out. If you've got a project in mind, it's going to be a great chance to bounce that off of Greg. We are wrapping up the first year of the Ag Drought Resilience projects. And so there's an RFP out for the next round, and the deadline on that is, I think it's is it the 1st of January now, Greg?
The 2nd of January.
2nd of January. Okay. So just a little shopkeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we'll post that once that recording is available on our website at agwaternetwork.org, along with highlights of the webinar. And, just as kind of an to introduce Greg and just what this program is about, I think anybody that's involved with ag, whether you're growing crops or forage, or you have an orchard, whatever you're doing, livestock, drought is a stressor. It is a huge stressor for everybody and everything involved in agriculture. And so I think really what this program is about is how can we better prepare for drought or just more limited water conditions? Because in some cases, we might not officially be in a drought, but in our ditch, we don't have the water that we would normally have. So how can we prepare for that? And how can we then have more favorable outcomes when it happens, both from a production standpoint and from an economic standpoint, which goes back to that stress and that mental health as well. So Greg, if you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can tell us what this program is really intended to accomplish, and then how it can hopefully help to reduce stress when drought rears its ugly head.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about where this came from. So a bit over a year ago, we were approached to pretty much be the face of this program and really do outreach in the ag community. And you're thinking, well, another grant program. Why do we need this? What's the purpose behind that? And really what I found, and I think others in the ag community, is that a lot of our current existing grant programs are really difficult to access. You either don't have the capacity or the time to apply, manage grant reports, invoices. That whole process can be a real obstacle. And that a lot of programs that are existing, they're either for large projects. And if you have a project that is $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, there's a lot of grant programs it's not worth their time to pay staff to even process that. And it's a lot of work for you all. And so part of this is for us to bear the burden of the grant. And by that, I mean, when we have any one of you are interested in applying, right now I'm getting someone about once a day calling or emailing me, and we chat about it. And some people fill out the application themselves. It's pretty simple. A lot of times myself or Phil, we fill out the application, go over it with them, go over the budget with them, have it send it back to us. again, that the step of let's try to make this as easy as possible. And like originally we had, like last year, we had decided that the deadline for this program would be December 1st, but really a lot of places throughout the states, everybody's season was going 2-3 weeks longer this year. So we're pushing that back to January. Again, just to make this as easy for producers as possible, we want your ideas out there. We want to test those. That's, we think, the answers to our drought that are in your heads, and things that you've tried in the past, are trying now or want to try, and we want to get that out as easy as possible. And so with the program that we have, we're trying to fund what we call innovative drought ideas. And it's like, well, what does innovative mean? So I can tell you a few things of what it doesn't mean. And so we don't have funding for sprinklers, drip irrigation, lining and piping ditches and laterals. I wish we had that kind of money. That's at a pay grade bigger than what we have. There are resources for that. That's something that we can help you with, and that it can be a long effort at times, but we can definitely help you out with that. But this is more for what we're trying to find, these innovative ideas. And I'm going to talk about what that exactly means today and give you a preview of projects that we have this year, projects that we're talking about with people for next year, and what we're hoping to get out of this. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to just fund a handful of projects. That's not the goal here. The goal here is to fund projects where we can collect data and demonstrate, is this practice help you in drought, and is it profitable for you to do? And that's a real key part of this, because our goal is to scale these up. Like I said, we don't want to just have a program that impacts 30, 40 individual operations in the state. We want to really identify practices that we can scale up over entire regions. And so that is, and often when we have people who come to us with an idea, and even great ideas, we'll still say, well, how about you want to do a practice on an entire pivot? Well, let's just do half of it. That way we can compare this practice to what you have been doing. So we will work with you in that way to try to to get the information that we need, so we can really show what's the purpose of all this, and is this working or not. So right now we are actively requesting proposals for our program. And like I said, we're really trying to develop specific plans and collecting data from every project. Some of our applicants, they can collect data themselves. We have some of our projects, they're able to do that, whether it's irrigation application data, just how much water they're applying, soil moisture, yields, cost of inputs per acre, and what they're selling on yields per acre. Sometimes they can't collect certain data like consumptive use, or even water applied, or soil moisture, and that's okay. That's where not only are we trying to help with making the application process easier, we have people like Phil Brink. I think Greg Vlaming's on here, and he's been working with a lot of our producers in the Southwest, Wilson Water Group, to really collect that data for you. Again, like I said, we want you to try your ideas and make it as easy as possible. And that's something that we work out with every project of, okay, what information do we want? Can the landowner get this information? Do they need help getting it? And so that's a part of every project that we put together. So you can go to our website right now, and I think Julie, if you want to throw a link in the chat, and we've got this map that shows all the projects that we have this year. And so we've got about 30 projects. A few of them are multi-year projects, and a few of them just started in the fall. And with those projects, each of those project sponsors, they have their own application to continue to refine or scale up their projects. Some of these projects, after 1 year, are already looking really promising, and we want to scale up, and that might mean more producers, more acres, more ditches. Some projects, we have one project that got hit by hail 3 times this year. And it's like, okay, well, how do we do this again? Are there things we can change to make this better and give it another try? Because that's going to happen, especially in a season as odd as we had this past year. And so you can look at those, but we're also looking at new projects for this year. And those have really fit into a couple different categories. And one of those is alternative crops. We've gotten, I think there's a lot of pressure on agricultural producers. You hear this a lot of, oh, well, why can't they just grow something different? And we grow crops for very good reasons. And a lot of the crops we grow are great crops. But at times, I think, especially in some regions of the state, like the Republican River Basin, the San Luis Valley, that are facing intense water shortages, we have a lot of people looking for crops that are profitable and that use the same or less water or more drought tolerant. And we've got a couple of projects this year. Kernza, perennial wheat, project that's working on legumes, a lot of small grains. Sainfoin, which is a perennial legume. And again, even though we've already got one Kernza project or one Sainfoin project in one area, we need to be trying these projects all over the state in different altitudes, different climates. Some of these aren't going to work, and that's okay. I mean, we're going to, if we spend $5,000-$10,000 on a project and we learn, okay, that crop is not going to work here, it's not profitable, it doesn't grow well, that's a great lesson to learn. But we're already talking with people about some of these next year, and with these we are being a bit cautious, where, okay, you want to try something, you want to try a different crop, well, is there even a market for that? Do you have a market? I'm sure there are plenty of crops you can all grow. In 2018, farmers all over the state proved that they can grow a ton of hemp, but can we sell it all? Can we process it all? And so that's a really, our projects this year, they're all connected to people who do have that ability to process and sell that crop. But that's something that, for example, one of our projects in southwestern Colorado, they have a mill and a processing facility, and we're already talking with a couple of other the Rural Economic Development Authority, because that processing facility is going to bring jobs. And okay, what funding can we get from other sources to really create this value chain that we're going to need for some of these crops? We've got a category of just efficiency, and again, we're not able to fund traditional efficiency projects. If those are projects that you have interest in, still let us know, and that's something that we can hopefully help with. Sometimes it's really tough to find funding sources outside of EQIP, but there are some options for some projects. But we've got like this year, we've got people trying out autonomous pivots, contours to improve irrigation. We've got one really interesting project where they're manufacturing the fittings that they've designed themselves to connect gated pipe to low pressure drip. Map and modernizing ditch operations with drones, irrigation scheduling. And even though in some places throughout the state, irrigation scheduling is, oh, that's we all do that, we got that. In other places, especially in areas that are flood irrigation dominated, that might be something that is innovative and not common there. And that's something that we're really interested in. We've got one project this year in Pueblo County on a flood irrigated vegetable operation that's using irrigation scheduling, moisture sensors, and a weather station. And they've really been able to learn a lot this year. And it was an interesting year because just with all the rain they had, it taught them a lot just about how much longer that water was staying in that soil than they realized. And going forward, that's a really important lesson for them. And LIPA nozzles, irrigation cameras. So we do have some projects that we're looking at that we fall into this efficiency category. Hay and forage. These are the majority of our projects are related to hay and forage. And whether I'm especially on the western slope, and I know in a lot of places you have people who have these smooth brome dominated fields, and over time they develop this layer of thatch and sod that at times I know plenty of ranchers where they're putting more water, more fertilizer to get the same return in yields. And I'll let Phil jump in here in a second and talk about one of our projects, but we're working with producers on just how can we completely change the mix of grasses on these. And what about looking at people who are in areas where, alfalfa is a great crop, but if you don't have the water anymore, it might not be as economically sustainable as it used to be. And so we've got people looking at, we've had a bunch of interesting projects this year, quite a few people in southwestern Colorado planting in alternative forages in older alfalfa stands where, you could irrigate that alfalfa and we'll be really, and get a return from it. We'll be really curious of just what's the trade-off of planting in a different forage and what's the water use, and like more importantly, what's the yields and what's the profitability? Is this a new tool that we can use in certain years? I know, Phil, if you wanted to jump in and mention about the project up in Meeker.
Yeah, so that project, you alluded to this issue that we see throughout kind of Western Colorado, especially in the mountains where we've got cool irrigation water being used on cool season forages. And so we start out with these conditions, and especially on hay meadows where we don't necessarily have a lot of livestock grazing, or where it's not the primary means of harvesting the forage, it's kind of secondary after you get regrowth from the haying. We see this condition that seems to set up a lot with the smooth brome kind of taking over, just because those are the kind of the ideal conditions for it. And it really doesn't let a lot of other types of forage into the mix. And so what happens is you get that sod bound condition that you mentioned, and it is it's a real challenge. It tends to drive yields down. It requires a lot of supplemental nitrogen, and even under adequate irrigation water, you wind up with really substandard yield. And so we've got a split field project outside of Meeker at a ranch that we started this past spring. And what that one is just taking a piece of land that's underneath the pivot. So it's just a section of about 17 acres. And we ripped out, or the rancher ripped out that 17 acres of brome, which was quite a process in and of itself. And they planted beardless barley along with some peas. And that was an interim crop. And what we found from talking with a lot of folks that have tried this, as well as grass and seed experts, is that smooth brome is so tough that you have to have an interim period. You can't just kill it off, spray it off, and then plant into it and expect it not to come back. And so this interim crop then was designed to try to help drive out that smooth brome. And he's since hayed that interim crop, and now we'll wait till next spring and see what it looks like as to whether he wants to try to spray that, if he feels that he's knocked out that smooth brome well enough to plant a more desirable forage mix into that, or if he wants to do another interim crop. But the whole objective is ultimately to have a forage mix that is going to be both more drought tolerant than the smooth brome and more productive. And in this case, require less nitrogen fertilizer.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. And a lot of this is, there's a group up in Grand County, a group of ranchers in the area of Kremling who've really, the past few years, have been experimenting with this a lot and trying different types of grass mixes, different forages, and showing some good success. And again, this is a practice that we would love to find more people willing to take on. And as Phil mentioned, 17 acres isn't a lot, but that's a great way for us to really study and see an impact on this. Another project that they're just starting this week is in Otero County, southern part of Otero County, and off of a ditch where they get very irregular water. It's pretty feast or famine water for them. And I mean, they rely on annual forages for their cattle operation. And what they're looking at, and they've started to do already, is transition those to different perennial grasses. And what they have found is that in wet years, that doesn't really benefit them, but in dry and average years, that this switch is going to be beneficial to them. And they're betting on the fact that they're likely going to have a lot more dry and normal years than wet years in the future. And so that's another project that we're undergoing right now. And then livestock. So we've got a couple of these this year, and then we're talking to quite a few people about these for next year and looking at this and just where does livestock fit into all this? And we do have a virtual fencing project up in Routt County looking at just how to better manage cattle on allotments and with the forages they have. That, I mean, I was up there visiting, and on this one allotment, it was pretty interesting, where really in a dry year, in a dry summer, some of the forages are really only sticking around in the early part of the summer and late spring. And by midsummer, those forages are not even around anymore. And that this allowed that rancher to keep those cattle on those forages and really pick where they're going to be grazing. And we're talking with other people about these projects. One, for example, is using virtual fencing on an irrigated pasture or a pasture where they keep their cattle, and trying to see, okay, does this, and they also want to start managing their cattle differently and grazing them differently. And it's like, okay, does this mean that we're going to increase the soil, the moisture capacity of your soil? We're going to reduce compaction. Those are great things to investigate. And virtual fencing is the tool that lets us look at those practices. We've had a project this year of grazing cover crops versus just feeding cattle with grain corn, and looking at just the comparison of the economic returns on that. Talking right now with a group out in Lincoln County, a family out there. And when mention water to them, they're taking 3, 4, 5,000 acre pastures and bringing them down to 300-acre paddocks. And they're having a lot of success of doing that and intensively grazing, but it means they need more water tanks. And even though a water tank isn't innovative, what they're trying to do is, and that's what we're really looking at trying to support here. And then soil practices. And we've got quite a few of these going on right now. And this is something that we're really interested in. And there's a lot of traction throughout the state on this. I mean, we've got one project, I know, Phil, up in Logan County with dryland wheat, and using a stripper header versus a traditional header on harvesting. And we're going to just be looking long term, how much more moisture is going to be in that soil profile after doing this. We've got a project in Larimer County with a farmer out there who does dry land and irrigated. And he makes his own compost, essentially, from just manure and just spent grain from a brewery, and then he's adding biochar to it. He's adding biochar to half of it, and we're looking at, okay, does this help get more moisture in his soils? He has some pretty degraded soils, and he's really been struggling to figure out how to just improve them. And then just residue management, especially one that we had this year and that we're really interested in supporting is trying to do more residue management, different kinds of tillage on these furrow and flood irrigated fields. And that's not easy. It's tough work, but I know that in some of these dry years, that has really helped some producers I know who do implement those practices. And maybe it takes equipment, and that's something that we can help cover the costs of and pay for. And then one pretty interesting project we have over in Mesa County is biochar injection. We have a producer there who's using equipment that's used on sports fields for injecting nutrients through the turf layer. And as Phil mentioned, there's that sod layer that forms on a lot of irrigated pastures, and he's inserting this kind of biochar through that layer of turf or that layer of sod with that injector. And we're going to see how the results are that. So we're getting a lot of those results right now, but already we're talking with people about projects for next year. And these conversations, it can be 1, 2, 3, 4 conversations, phone calls, Zoom meetings, meeting you at your farmer ranch. I mean, we're already talking to some people out in Mesa County about camelina. And looking at growing camelina, and is that an alternative crop? Kernza, not just for grain, but also for forage. Looking at that at higher altitude areas. Efficiency, auto tarps. There's a great auto tarp project in the Gunnison where they're using, and by auto, pretty much these, just really a gate that automatically will drop down on these laterals and have a series of these on individual laterals for flood irrigated fields. And you just start them all open, and then every 12 hours you drop one, and then the other, and the other, and it can really save a significant amount of time. And those are fairly inexpensive, great projects. Irrigation scheduling and timing, again, that's something that has been around, but we're here to help you figure that out. Is this a fit for your operation? Livestock managing to improve soil moisture and forage availability, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, talking with people about increasing water holding capacity. Right now, talking with one orchard grower and trying to figure out, okay, looking at some pretty big aeration equipment to run between their rows. And it would be interesting to just see how much of an impact does that have, because I think he mentioned he takes about 20 passes on each of those rows in a season, and that they have pretty serious compaction issues, and see if this can really help with that. And then just hay and forage. I'm not a grass expert. I don't know the difference between most grasses, but we're working with a lot of people at seed companies, experts who can help us and see if you're interested in changing the kind of grass in a pasture, or implementing something like a sandfoin or a kernza. Silphium is another one that I know one producer has been experimenting with. These are things that we can definitely help support. And so our current projects range from about $5,000 to $30,000. Some of these, most of our applicants are individual farmers and ranchers. We do have some projects where the applicant is a conservation district or some other entity, and then they're working with 3, 4, 5 individual farmers and ranchers, and that works really well too. We don't have a match requirement, but having matching funds can make your project more competitive. And that's something that we do talk about with a lot of our when we're talking about the scope of work. It's like, well, what can you bring to this? Or can we find funding from somewhere else to help supplement this? Applicants must reach out to us to talk about their project. You have to talk about your project with us to be considered for funding. That's a key rule that we're sticking with. And like I said, we'll help you with the application, final reports, collecting data, invoices. I've got one producer, his invoice, he texts me pictures of his receipts. That works. We can prove this. That's all I need. I don't need a form filled out. So again, we're trying to make this as convenient as possible for you all. And so our deadline is January 2nd. You can find our application at the website. You can contact me anytime and we can talk about this. And I think before we get into any questions, I know, Phil, you've been involved in quite a few of these projects. And I was curious if you wanted to share a bit of what you're learning from any of these, besides the ranch project up in Meeker.
Yeah, so we are learning a lot. I think one of the more interesting projects that is really new to me is one we've got going here in Boulder County, and this is one where he's actually utilizing intensive bale grazing, along with selective cover crop plantings to try to rehabilitate some land. It's ag land, but it's been neglected. It's been severely degraded by both prairie dogs and inadequate irrigation for a long time. It's owned by the county, and so was an opportunity for a younger producer to try to rehabilitate this parcel and to do so more economically and within the confines of what he needs to use to kind of restrict impacting the prairie dogs. In other words, lethal control is out of the question, and so he has to work within the system that to be able to try to manage and to try to corral those prairie dogs. And so he's using this intensive bale grazing to infuse more nutrients and more biomass, more carbon into the soils to try to start preparing a better seed bed for more desirable species to grow in this area. And a lot of it's right now just covered in bare dirt or just whatever weeds can grow. And he's also using selective cover crops like sorghum Sudan that grow very tall. And what he's finding is that prairie dogs will not go through a dense stand of tall vegetation. And so he's being able to selectively move around this strategy of both with the bale grazing in the confined areas with cattle, as well as selective planting with different types of tall vegetation to try to kind of start moving the prairie dogs into a smaller area and opening up a larger area where he can then plant something, a more desirable species mix of forages.
So, yeah, thank you, Phil. And like long term, what we're looking at is, I mean, some of our projects are single year projects. We do have the capacity and ability to fund multi-year projects. And that's great too. We'll have to look at that. But really, like I mentioned earlier, is our goal here is to scale up. And what's been really great about this is, I mean, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, all the basin roundtables, a number of special districts have all been incredibly supportive of this. And that's, I mean, I'm trying to be as diligent as we can with our projects, at the same time making it easier for you all to be able to implement your ideas. And so we're definitely going to be having some, I mean, we have high expectations for results here, but we're okay with accepting the fact that yes, some of these projects are not going to, some of these ideas are going to fail, and that is okay. That's a great lesson for us to learn of what not to do and really try to narrow in on these practices. And we're already working with funds and talking with federal agencies and looking at some of these federal grants that are out there to hopefully scale up some of these projects significantly when we really start showing some great results over a number of years. And that's our long-term goal with this project. So I think that I might stop there and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I would just add that, you know, if you've got an idea that you've been kicking around that might make your operation or somebody else's operation more drought resilient, and you're wondering, you know, what that might look like and would like to have some help kind of thinking through that, you know, this is a great opportunity, whether you apply for money or just try it on your own. This is a great opportunity really to access some folks that can give you feedback. It is not just Greg and I. We've also, you know, as mentioned, had Wilson Water Group involved, and then we tap other experts or other people that have knowledge in specific areas on these projects when we're reviewing them to try to get a better handle on whether or not the results are going to be meaningful. Because as Greg said, there is a data management component to all these projects because we want to measure what we're finding in the results.
Well, one question that came up there is just equipment funding requirements. And so in some of our projects that we have this year, we have paid for pieces of equipment or helped cost share pieces of equipment. I mean, if you come to us wanting a $150,000 new tractor, That's probably not going to happen. But if you want to cost share a piece of equipment that fits into what we've been spending, or even, I mean, like I said, some of these smaller pieces of equipment we've just outright paid for. If it's if it is necessary for you to help implement this project, then that's definitely on the table. And so, yeah, that, and we've paid for diesel, we've paid for even just people's time, extra time if they're going to be in a tractor more than they were expecting. So that's something that we can really compensate you for. And then also just any double dip issues for for producers already participating in Star Plus. Not, I mean, we don't, as far as I know, no, we don't have any issues. I mean, we've got a few people who are in involved in Star, but also doing this program too, and we found that they can work really well together. So then another question: if a producer is feeling the impact of drought, but doesn't have an innovative project idea, but is interested in trying something new, where do you recommend they start? So we did have this year where we had a few people who like, well, I just want to do something. And that was really hard for us to really come up with an idea and also really get their buy-in. I mean, we did. We had a very small project of a producer who just wanted to do something, and they ended up not following through, and it wasn't of interest. And so having real commitment from the producer and their idea and something that they believe in is going to be pretty critical in this. I mean, if they want to chat with us, and I'd be more than happy to talk about like what kinds of problems they're facing and learn more about that. And maybe there's an idea out there that can fit. But I think we're really leaning towards people who have some idea, or they're really going to follow through and commit to this project.
Yeah, and I should just add that if you want to use the text to ask your question, that's great. Or if you want to just unmute and ask your question verbally, that's fine too. So another question, Greg, is any suggestions for alfalfa alternatives?
I mean, we've got a couple of projects that we're looking at. I mean, Sandfoin is one project. And so we've got a project southwestern Colorado with the Ute Mountain Utes. They're growing Sandfoin. And that's an interesting crop that you've actually have a number of people growing it throughout the state for some time. We don't know a lot of we don't have a lot of data on it. And honestly, there's a few people who may know more than a lot of research papers out there. We need to get to that information. So that's one crop that's possible. I know that we've been chatting with some dairy producers, just looking at, okay, what's a different kind of crop mix, if possible, that can give you the great nutrient value of alfalfa. And that's really I mean, alfalfa is an amazing crop. There's a reason so many people are growing it. And in some areas, though, what we're finding is we just don't have the water to do that anymore. In terms of what is the total allocation of funds available, we've got about $1 million this year. And we're already working on trying to secure funding for the next couple of years. And AGI or other income barriers like NRCS programs have, I couldn't tell you. I mean, honestly, I don't know every income barrier that NRCS programs have. It's something that we do look at, especially if the producer has the ability to fund the project themselves. That's something that, I mean, they're going to have to we're going to need their support. I mean, many times we're working with people who don't have the ability to fund these projects themselves. And even just them taking out acreage to experiment is a huge significant risk. And so, I mean, we don't have any firm barriers on income, but if I have been approached by people who do have billion-dollar ranches and they want to participate. And I mean, if it's a good idea and a good practice, there's a possibility, but we're going to be expecting some amount of match in that.
One of the projects, Greg, that we think we're probably going to have for this next go around, which I'm really excited about, is it's a field affected by salinities, alkaline soils. It has very shallow groundwater. It's a not uncommon condition, especially on the western slope, but on the eastern slope in places as well. You get that white sheet of salt. How do you rehabilitate those in an economic way and in a way that long term is going to make that field more usable, both during drought and during normal weather conditions? And so we've got a project that we're starting to work on now with a rancher out in Moffat County, and I think that's going to be really exciting to see how that works out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, Phil, because when we talk about salt. I mean, really, when you're talking about, and especially that field in Moffat County, I went out and visited it last week. I mean, that soil, you can dump water right on top of that area where it's pretty saline, and it doesn't even break through. I mean, and you just see this field where patches of just dirt, and I mean they're not absorbing any of the water that they apply in those areas, and they have some real issues with that, and that's a problem that we're seeing in a lot of places throughout the state. So another question, have you seen any new innovations as opposed to pivot and towers? So we do have like a couple of projects this year. I mentioned one, a rancher up over in Delta County who's been they're using a 3D printer, and they're making these connections for gated pipe to drip line. And those are pretty interesting. We've got a very similar project over down in the Canais of a rancher with gated pipe surge valves. And then he's just kind of made his own fittings to attach lay flat pipe. I know on that specific field, very porous, rocky soil and flood irrigation, he couldn't even get his water to the end of the field. And so he's just using those lay flat pipes in certain areas so he can just more uniformly irrigate the field. An autonomous pivot. We have a project in the San Luis Valley, a potato grower down there using an autonomous pivot. And that'll be pretty interesting to see, especially how well, there's a lot of data on autonomous pivots and corn and soybeans, but a crop like potatoes, especially where you have these dirt gaps between each row, and how well does that work? Also in the San Luis Valley, have a project with the Rio Grande and the Center Conservation Districts with these cameras on one of their pivots. And that'll really help with barley. And what they're looking at is with irrigating barley and how soon at the end of the season they can shut off that last irrigation. And that gets into this other, just better being able to detect your field. And I'm not going to accuse any farmer of this, but I know I do it, is if I have the water, I'm going to over irrigate at times because I need to be safe. It's better than under irrigating. And I know that this can happen. And how can we better see what's happening in a field? And was visiting with a farmer last week who's had a lot of great use using a drone. And he grows alfalfa for seed, and usually does 3 flood irrigation runs throughout the season. And on one of his fields last year, he ended up only doing 2. Another field, he ended up only doing 2 runs and then a section for a third, because he could just so much better see how well this is growing and what needed to be irrigated and what didn't. And so those are some practices that we're looking at too that would be pretty interesting.
So, Greg, I just we'll have probably another 3 or 4 minutes for questions and or more if we need it, but and then we'll wrap it up. I wanted to ask, so you had mentioned that project out in the plains where they're reducing very large pastures down to more manageable sized paddocks and running water lines out there. I wanted to, I guess it's not something we've talked about. There's a lot of places in the state, a lot of rangeland where that could be done. So I'm curious, if a rancher comes with an idea, what is the innovative aspect that needs to be part of that project to be able to get funded through this program?
Yeah, if it's just I need a bunch of fences and some tanks, that's not going to work. It's okay. Are you managing your herd differently? Are you grazing them? Are they still going to just be grazing in the same areas the same amount of time? Are you trying to change how they graze, whether it's intensive or some other management practice? Especially a management practice that can improve, that's connected to water. Will this allow, are you going to, over a span of a couple of years, are you able to gain more pounds? Is there more forage biomass being produced? Is more water being stored in the soil? Those are key. And so will that simple tool of a water tank allow you to do that other practice? I know we a few weeks ago, we were at a field, Phil, that was pretty dominated with sagebrush. And boy, cows don't like sagebrush. And, and there's quite a few of those around the state. And I mean, even though it is not new to either run chains and pull all the sagebrush out or burn a sagebrush field, that's what are we going to be planting behind that? I think that's something that we could do too, is look at some of those non-irrigated fields, because we're going to be demanding more of our dry land agriculture as the future goes on, and that's going to take a lot of work.
One of the things I've been surprised about is that we've not seen any projects from who we would call horse folks that I can think of. And there's a lot of degraded conditions around raising horses. Sometimes it's just a fact that horses can be pretty tough on land, especially when they're in a small area. Nothing against horses. I love horses, but there are a lot of, especially small acreages, where that's a problem. And is there a way to still use those parcels, but do so in a way that's going to make forage grow more uniformly, and they're going to be more drought resilient? I don't know what the answers to those questions are, but if there's somebody out there that has some ideas that we could test, I think that'd be something we would look at.
Yeah, and Phil, you brought up small acreage, and we do have a couple of small acreage projects currently. I think the key with those and every project is how is this going to be relevant, not just for you, but the community as a whole. And so if you bring us a project that's great for you, but it's so specific that we have a hard time seeing how this can be relevant to anybody else, that probably isn't a competitive project. But even a small operation might have a project or a practice that they're trying to implement that can be relevant for much larger farms and ranches.
So, Greg, what is the kind of the range of projects in terms of the dollars that can be funded or potentially be eligible to be funded through this program?
Yeah. So this year, I think our least expensive project was about $2,000. And our most expensive project was $32,000. And some of these projects we paid everything for, some we've just paid a part for. If you come in with a project that is $60, $70, $80,000 and it's a good project, we'll try to really talk with you and work with you where are other sources of funding where we can supplement what we're able to provide. The focus of the program, though, is to fund people and projects that don't have the capacity to apply for traditional grant programs. So if I know like large nonprofits that regularly apply for funding through the Water Conservation Board, this isn't, unless if they're working with a lot of individual producers, this isn't the program for them. We're really trying to focus on individual farmers and ranchers, whether it's a one contract with them in a project or them being bundled together through an individual, a district, a nonprofit. That's who we're really focusing on.
This is Marilyn.
Hey, Marilyn.
Yes.
Oh. Sorry about that. Yeah. Phil, any other questions?
Well, I think we've touched on a number of things. I wonder, do you have any kind of parting thoughts or parting advice to anybody that's kicking around an idea? In
I'd
terms of,
say, yeah, I'd say reach out to us as soon as possible. January 2nd is going to come around fast, and it does take time to flesh out some of these ideas. I think the the ag season slowed down for a lot of people this past week finally, and so now people have time to really focus on some other projects like this. But I'd say reach out to us soon.
yeah. So, and I think that Julie put the contact information, or at least your website there on chat, so you can go to coagwater.org to contact Greg, and you can contact me as well, and I'll chat with you about your project, and we can connect Greg in there as well. But if you do have a project, yeah, it's good to kind of think that through. But if you want to bounce it off, folks, it's never too early to start. So, well, Greg, really appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through the Ag Drought Resilience Grant Program. I think it's really shaping up to be a good program. We're really excited about what we're starting to learn through this and what we're going to learn in the future. This webinar has been recorded, so we'll post that on our website, and you'll be able to go back and watch pieces of that if you're interested. If you have any general comments or questions about today's webinar, please give me a call, phil@brinkinc.biz. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Hope we have some of you folks that are interested in applying, and do contact us if you are. So that, I think, will conclude our webinar, and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Greg and Phil.
Thank you.